The first time Maya Chen walked onto the Naval Special Warfare Command deck, the laughter was audible. It wasn't loud or cruel. Not at first. It was the kind of easy, dismissive chuckle that men exchange when they see something that doesn't belong. She was 5'5" on a good day, with a lean frame that looked more like a competitive distance runner than a hand-to-hand combat instructor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she carried a simple gym bag over one shoulder. The deck was a cavernous space of polished concrete and climbing ropes that disappeared into the high vaulted ceiling. The air smelled of chalk, sweat, and industrial cleaner. Along the far wall, a row of heavy bags hung like silent sentinels. In the center of the room, 30 of the Navy's most elite warriors were finishing their warm-up, their bodies glistening, their eyes already sharp with the day's purpose. Master Chief John Tank Kowalski, the man in charge of the morning's physical training, walked over to meet her. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4", with a neck as thick as a tree trunk and a chest that strained the fabric of his gray t-shirt. He had a reputation for being able to break men with just his presence. He extended a hand, his grip like a vice, meant to intimidate. Maya shook it, her face impassive. She didn't try to match his strength, she simply met it, held it for a moment, and then let go. The men watched the exchange with amusement. They saw a civilian, a woman being brought in to teach them something. To them it was a joke, a check-the-box exercise for some Pentagon diversity initiative. Maya had heard it all before. She'd grown up in a small town in Ohio, the only daughter of a Chinese immigrant father who ran a struggling restaurant and a mother who worked double shifts as a nurse. She wasn't a product of some elite martial arts academy. Her education had been on the mats of local gyms, in back-alley tournaments her father never knew about, and eventually in the brutal, unsanctioned fight circuits where men twice her size learned the hard way that size was a terrible disadvantage if you didn't know how to use it. She had spent years studying not just how to fight, but how the body moved, how pressure points worked, and how to use an opponent's momentum and strength against them. She wasn't there to teach them to be tougher. She was there to teach them to be smarter. Master Chief Kowalski gestured for the men to gather round, where they formed a loose semicircle, their arms crossed over their massive chests. "All right, listen up," Kowalski's voice boomed, easily filling the space. "This is Maya Chen. She's a civilian consultant. For the next 2 weeks, she'll be running some of our hand-to-hand sessions." He paused, a slight smirk on his face. "Try not to break her." A ripple of suppressed chuckles went through the group. A young, cocky operator named Evans, who had a chip on his shoulder the size of an aircraft carrier, spoke up without raising his hand. "With all due respect, ma'am, what exactly are you going to teach us? How to do your taxes?" The laughter was louder this time, more open. A few of the older guys shot Evans a look that said tone it down, but they were smiling too. Maya waited for the laughter to die down completely. She looked at Evans, and not with anger, but with a calm, steady assessment. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice quiet but perfectly clear in the now silent room. "Evans. Operator Evans." "Operator Evans," Maya repeated, taking a slow step towards him. "Tell me, in a real fight, what's your first move?" Evans scoffed. "Depends. But if the guy's squared up, probably a blast double-leg takedown. Get him on the ground, establish top control, and pound him out." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "A blast double. You shoot your lead leg in, drop your level, and explode through the opponent driving with your legs." She described his own move back to him with the precision of a surgeon. "It's powerful, effective. It relies on explosive strength and forward momentum." She took another step closer. "Now, what if you can't use that momentum? What if the opponent isn't there to be driven through?" Evans frowned. "What do you mean, isn't there?" Maya turned to Master Chief Kowalski. "Master Chief, would you mind?" She gestured for him to come forward. The interest in the room shifted from amusement to a mild curiosity. Kowalski, looking slightly puzzled, walked over and stood in front of her. He was a full foot taller and probably weighed 100 pounds more. The disparity was almost comical. "Put your hands on my shoulders, please," Maya instructed him calmly. Kowalski hesitated, then placed his massive hands on her shoulders. He could have crushed her clavicles with a single squeeze. "Now, I want you to push me, as hard as you can." Kowalski looked at her like she was insane. "I'm not going to do that, ma'am." "It's an order, Master Chief. Push me." Her voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. The men watched, their eyes wide. This was either going to be a very short demonstration or a very short instructor. Kowalski sighed, looked at his men as if to say she asked for it, and then pushed. It wasn't even his full power, maybe 50%, but it was a tremendous shove. The instant she felt the pressure increase, Maya didn't try to brace. She moved. In a fluid, almost imperceptible motion, she rotated her torso, dropped her weight, and stepped diagonally to the outside. It was a perfect Tai Sabaki, a body movement technique from Judo and Aikido. Kowalski's massive hands, suddenly finding no resistance, slid off her shoulders as she turned. His own momentum, combined with his immense power, caused him to lurch forward, and stumbling 2 steps past her to regain his balance. The room went utterly silent. The only sound was the squeak of Kowalski's boots on the polished concrete as he stopped himself. He turned around, a look of genuine surprise on his face. He hadn't been thrown, he had been redirected. His own strength had been his undoing. Maya stood exactly where she had been, not a hair out of place. She looked at Evans, whose mouth was slightly agape. "That's what I mean, Operator Evans," she said. "If you commit all your force to a single vector and it's not there, you're not just missing the target, you're handing the target all your power and balance on a silver platter." The dynamic in the room had shifted. The amusement was gone, replaced by a wary respect. And they had just seen their almost unbeatable Master Chief made to look clumsy by a woman half his size without her even throwing a strike. The session continued. Maya had them pair up and practice basic defensive movements, focusing on angle creation and off-balancing. She moved among them, correcting a foot here, adjusting a hip there. She was patient, precise, and utterly in control. By the time the 2-hour session was over, the men were exhausted in a way they hadn't been from their usual strength drills. They were mentally tired from having to think about movement instead of just muscling through it. As they filed out, more than a few glanced back at the small woman who was calmly packing her bag. They didn't laugh anymore. The word spread through the team that day. The new instructor? Yeah, the little one. She made Tank stumble like a rookie. But for Evans and a few of the others, the lesson hadn't fully sunk in. To them, it was a trick, a party stunt. It wasn't a real fight, and in their world, the real fight was everything. The second week was when things were supposed to get live. The first week had been about theory, balance, and the physics of unarmed combat. Maya had taught them about levers, about the importance of the skeletal structure over the muscular, and about how to feel for an opponent's center of gravity. They had practiced drills, learning to yield and redirect, to move from a position of disadvantage to one of control. It was a paradigm shift for men whose entire careers had been built on the principle of overwhelming force. Some of them, like the older, more seasoned operators, so absorbed the information with a quiet intensity. They had been in enough real-world scraps to know that things didn't always go according to plan, and that having another tool in the box was never a bad thing. But the younger ones, the ones still proving themselves, still trying to earn their place in the Brotherhood, saw it as soft. They called it dancing when they thought she couldn't hear. They mocked the precise footwork and the focus on leverage, calling it gymnastics. Evans was the ringleader of this descent. He was a classic alpha, built like a brick wall, fast and incredibly strong. He lived for the controlled aggression of the training environment. To him, fighting was simple. You hit the other guy harder and more often than he hit you, and you never ever stopped moving forward. Maya's philosophy of waiting, feeling, and then redirecting felt passive, almost cowardly to his way of thinking. He started asking pointed questions during her sessions, trying to trip her up, trying to get her to admit that her methods were useless against a real opponent. "So, if I've got a guy in a mount," Evans challenged on the third day, his tone dripping with condescension, "and I'm postured up, raining down hammer fists, what good is all this spinning and redirection stuff? I'm already on top. I already have the dominant position." Maya was kneeling beside two operators who were practicing an escape from side control. She looked up at Evans, who was standing over her, arms crossed. She stood up slowly, brushing the chalk from her knees. "That's a great question, Evans. It shows you're thinking about application." Her voice was calm, pleasant even. It infuriated him. In that scenario, the redirecting isn't for you. It's for him. If you're the one on top, you're right. Your goal is to maintain that position and deliver damage. But the man on the bottom, if he knows how, can use your own weight and your own strikes against you. Every time you post a hand to lift your weight for a bigger strike, you're creating a frame he can manipulate. Every time you shift your hips to generate power, you're giving him an opportunity to bump and create space. She paused, looking him directly in the eye. The mount is only dominant if the man on top is smarter than the man on bottom. Evans just shook his head and walked away. He wasn't buying it. He wanted a piece of her. He wanted to prove, in front of the entire platoon, that brains couldn't beat brawn when the brawn was this big and this mean. And Master Chief Kowalski, who observed every session with a keen, professional eye, saw it coming. He saw the tension building in Evans, saw the way the younger man's jaw tightened whenever Maya spoke. He called Evans aside after one particularly grueling afternoon session. "Evans," Kowalski said, his voice low and serious, "I see that look. You've got something to prove. Let it go." "With respect, Master Chief, I don't have anything to prove," Evans replied, though his tone said the opposite. "I just think we're wasting time on parlor tricks. We're not ballerinas. We're SEALs." Kowalski studied him for a long moment. "That woman," he said, pointing a thick finger towards the exit Maya had just walked through, "has forgotten more about the human body and how to break it than you'll ever know." I felt it. She didn't just move me. She took everything I had and used it to make me look like an idiot. "You think you're stronger than me, Evans?" The question hung in the air. Evans couldn't answer that. No one was stronger than Tank. "That's what I thought," Kowalski finished. "So tread carefully." But Evans couldn't let it go. It festered. It became a personal mission. The final session of the 2-week block was scheduled as a free-rolling sparring day. It was an opportunity for the operators to put into practice what they'd learned. The rules were simple: no strikes to the groin, throat, or eyes. Everything else was fair game. The atmosphere in the command deck that morning was electric. The men were itching to go live, to feel the thud of impact, to test their new skills against each other. Evans saw his chance, and he walked over to where Maya was standing with Kowalski, going over the pairing sheet. "Ma'am," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. The chatter died down instantly. All eyes turned to them. "I've been thinking about what you said all week. About leverage and momentum. About brains over brawn." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "I was wondering if you'd do me the honor of a demonstration. You know, just a quick one so we can really see how it's done against someone who's actually trying." The room was dead silent. This was a direct challenge, and a public one. It was a move calculated to humiliate. If she refused, she would lose all credibility. If she accepted, she was putting herself in a cage with a man who outweighed her by 70 pounds of pure muscle and had every intention of crushing her. Kowalski opened his mouth to shut it down, to dress Evans down for insubordination, but Maya placed a hand on his arm. "It's all right, Master Chief," she said softly. Then she looked at Evans, and for the first time the men saw something flicker in her calm, dark eyes. It wasn't fear. It was a quiet, profound disappointment. "A demonstration? Is that what you want, Operator Evans?" "Yes, ma'am. I think it would be educational for everyone." He was practically glowing with self-satisfaction. Maya nodded slowly. "Okay." She turned to the rest of the men who were now crowded around, forming a large circle on the mats. "Clear a space." They scrambled to obey. She stepped into the center of the circle, took off her lightweight jacket, and folded it neatly, placing it at the edge of the mat. Underneath, she wore a simple black t-shirt and athletic pants. She looked even smaller, even more fragile. Evans stepped into the circle opposite her, cracking his neck and rolling his shoulders. He looked like a predator sizing up its prey. "The rules are simple," Maya announced, her voice calm and steady. "We go until someone taps, verbally submits, or is unable to continue. Operator Evans, do you understand?" "I understand," he said, a wide, confident grin spreading across his face. "Then begin when you're ready." For a moment, they just stood there. Evans circled, his hands up in a standard boxing guard, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet. Maya stood in a neutral stance, her hands down by her sides, her weight centered. She was completely still, her eyes tracking his every micro-movement. It was unnerving. Evans feinted a jab. "I'm trying to draw a reaction." She didn't flinch. He took a step closer. She took a half step back, maintaining the exact same distance. He was a wolf, and she was a shadow. The crowd of soldiers watched, barely breathing. This was not what they expected. They expected Evans to charge, to bulldoze her. But he was hesitant, and that hesitation was new. He was used to opponents who showed fear, who backed up, who gave him an opening. Maya gave him nothing. She was a void. He finally decided to close the distance. He shot forward, not with a full blast double, but with a quick level change, trying to grab a single leg. It was a fast, technically sound shot. But as his head dropped and his hands reached for her knee, Maya moved. She didn't try to sprawl, to smash her weight down on his back, which would have been a futile effort. Instead, she did something they had never seen. As he shot in, she circled her leg out of his reach and dropped her weight, not back but down and sideways, sliding her hip past his head. In a single fluid motion, she wrapped her arm around the back of his neck, not to choke him, but to control his head. She used his own forward momentum like a lever. His face was driven into the mat as he sailed past her. He ended up flat on his stomach, his head and neck pinned awkwardly by her grip. It took him a second to process what had happened. He was on the ground and she was behind him, controlling his head. This was worse than being made a fool of. He was in a dangerous position. He tried to scramble to his knees, to use his sheer power to explode up. But Maya moved with him, staying glued to his back like a second skin. She released the grip on his head, and in a flash her left arm snaked under his armpit and her hand clamped onto the back of his neck. Her right arm slid under his other armpit, and she locked her hands together behind his head. It was a body triangle from hell. It wasn't a choke. It was a spinal lock, a compression hold that put immense, unbearable pressure on his entire upper back and neck. Evans panicked. He thrashed, trying to roll, trying to buck her off. But she was anchored to him, her weight perfectly distributed, her legs wrapped around his torso. Every move he made to escape only tightened the hold. He could feel his vertebrae compressing, a sharp, burning pain shooting down his spine. He couldn't breathe properly. He reached back, trying to grab anything, to pry her arms loose, but her grip was like forged steel. And he tried to slam his body backward, to crush her against the mat, but she simply rolled with the impact, absorbing it and maintaining the lock. The soldiers watched in stunned silence. The mighty Evans, the aggressive powerhouse, was being systematically dismantled on the ground by a woman who weighed less than his kit bag. He was completely helpless. Maya spoke, her voice calm and instructional, as if she were in a classroom. "You see, this is what I was talking about. You committed to the shot with 100% of your force. You gave me all your forward momentum. I didn't need to be stronger than you. I just needed to be where you weren't, and to use what you gave me." Evans's face was purple with strain and humiliation. He gave one last, desperate heave, trying to roll to his back. As he did, Maya expertly transitioned. She let him roll, but as he came up, she moved with him, sliding her right arm free from the body lock. In the blink of an eye, she was on top, her knees pinning his hips, one hand gripping his wrist, the other wrapping around his head. He was now flat on his back, with her mounted on his chest. She looked down at him, her face impassive. He tried to buck, to bridge, but her low center of gravity and the angle of her body made it impossible. She had all the control. "You're on bottom in the mount now, Operator Evans," she said, her voice quiet. "What's your move? Remember what you asked me earlier? What good is my stuff here?" She shifted her weight slightly, and he winced as she applied pressure to his floating ribs with her knee. He was trapped. Absolutely, totally trapped. The room was silent, save for Evans's ragged, desperate breathing. He had two choices: submit or have his ribs broken as she systematically crushed him. The look in her eyes was not cruel, but it was absolute. It was the look of a professional who had done this 1,000 times before. She had proven her point 100 times over, but he hadn't tapped. His pride wouldn't let him. Maya sighed, a soft sound of resignation. "Okay." She adjusted her base slightly, posting one hand on his chest for stability. Then, with a sharp, precise twist of her hips and a drop of her weight, she drove her knee hard into his ribcage. A sickening crack echoed in the silent room. Evans screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony. He immediately began slapping the mat frantically with his free hand, the universal sign of submission. Maya released him instantly and rolled away, and getting to her feet in one smooth motion. She stood over him, her breathing only slightly elevated. Evans lay on the mat, curled in a fetal position, clutching his side, his face contorted in pain. Two corpsmen rushed forward, kneeling beside him. The other soldiers stared, their mouths open, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning, profound respect. Maya looked around the circle, meeting the eyes of as many men as she could. Her gaze was not triumphant. It was calm, steady, and held a quiet sorrow. "He didn't tap," she said simply by way of explanation. "In a real fight, your opponent won't tap either. You have to be willing to go all the way. But you also have to be smart enough to know when you've lost, so you can live to fight another day." She looked down at Evans, who was being carefully attended to by the medics. I hope he learns that." She walked over, picked up her jacket, and folded it over her arm. Master Chief Kowalski stared at her, his face an unreadable mask. He glanced at Evans, then back at her. "Remind me never to piss you off," he said, his voice low. Maya almost smiled. "You don't have the right kind of ego, Master Chief. That's what makes you dangerous." She gave him a small nod, and then walked out of the command deck, leaving a crowd of utterly silenced warriors in her wake. The only sounds were Evans's pained groans and the whispered, awed murmurs of the men who had just witnessed the impossible. They had claimed she was no match for their SEAL commander. They would never make that claim again. The aftermath of the demonstration was a complex and unsettling thing. For the first few hours, the command deck was a hive of hushed, intense discussion. The corpsman had taken Evans to the base medical facility. The diagnosis was 2 cracked ribs and severe bruising to the intercostal muscles. He would be on light duty for at least 6 weeks. a humbling and painful consequence of his pride. The other operators went through the motions of their remaining training for the day, but their minds were elsewhere. They replayed the sequence over and over in their heads: the shot, the fluid evasion, the inescapable compression on the ground, and finally, that sickening crack. It was a masterclass, not just in technique, but in psychology. Maya hadn't just beaten Evans. She had dissected him, exposed every flaw in his approach, and then, when he refused to learn the lesson, she had applied the logical, brutal conclusion. Team Master Chief Kowalski found himself in an unusual position. He was unsure of what to do next. The training block was technically over. Maya's 2-week contract was complete. She had fulfilled her obligation. But the fallout was significant. He sat in his small office, staring at the wall, wrestling with his own feelings. Part of him, the part that had been a SEAL for over 2 decades, was impressed beyond measure. He had never seen such efficient, brutal control. Another part of him, the part responsible for the men under his command, was concerned. Evans was a hothead, but he was also a talented operator. This could break him, mentally as well as physically. He decided he needed to talk to Maya. He found her in the gym bag storage room, packing her few pieces of equipment into a worn duffel bag. She looked up as he entered, her expression neutral. "Master Chief." "Ms. Chen." He leaned against the doorframe, his massive frame blocking most of the light. "That was quite a finish." "It was an unfortunate one," she replied, her voice even. "I gave him every opportunity to avoid it." "I know you did." Kowalski sighed, running a hand over his closely cropped hair. "I saw it. We all saw it. He was too proud to tap, too stubborn to admit he was beaten." He paused. "The question is, what do we do now? Half the guys are in awe of you. The other half are terrified they'll look as helpless as Evans did." Maya stopped packing and looked at him. "Good. Let them be terrified. Fear isn't the enemy, Master Chief. Complacency is. Arrogance is. Evans walked onto that mat today believing he couldn't lose. And he believed his strength and his will were absolute guarantees of victory. That kind of thinking will get him, and maybe the men who depend on him, killed." She zipped up her bag. "I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to give them an edge. An edge isn't a new punch or a cool choke. It's a mindset. It's the understanding that every fight is a problem to be solved, not just a wall to be smashed through." Kowalski nodded slowly. He understood. He had seen it before, in the most seasoned operators. They didn't rely on brute force. They relied on adaptability, on intelligence. Maya had just forced 30 of the fittest men on the planet to confront their own intellectual and emotional limitations. It was a tougher lesson than any physical beating. Meanwhile, at the medical bay, Evans was lying in a sterile bed, staring at the ceiling. The pain was a constant, sharp reminder of his failure. His pride was in tatters. He replayed the fight in his mind, but this time, he wasn't focused on his own strength. He was focused on her movements, the way she hadn't even seemed to try, the way she had predicted his every move, the way she had looked at him not with anger, but with a calm, almost pitying disappointment. He had never felt so small, so utterly outclassed. For the first time in his adult life, he was forced to question the very foundation of his identity as a fighter. Was he strong, or was he just stubborn? Was he skilled, or was he just aggressive? The questions were more painful than his ribs. Days turned into a week. The story of what happened spread beyond the team, becoming a kind of legend on the base. Some embellished it, and saying she had broken 3 ribs, or that Evans had been unconscious for a minute. But the core truth remained. A small civilian woman had dismantled a SEAL in front of his peers. Maya had returned to her normal life, a life of consulting jobs, teaching at a small, unassuming gym in Virginia Beach, and living alone in a quiet apartment. She didn't dwell on the Evans incident. It was just another data point in a long career of proving that the human body, when intelligently controlled, was a far more effective weapon than just a larger, stronger one. Then, 2 weeks later, she got a call. It was Master Chief Kowalski. He asked if she would be willing to come back to the base, not to teach a class, but to meet with someone. He wouldn't say who. Curiosity piqued, she agreed. When she arrived at the command deck, but it was empty except for 2 figures standing in the center of the mat. One was Kowalski. The other was Evans. He looked different. The cocky swagger was gone. He stood with a slight stiffness from his still-healing ribs, but it was his eyes that had changed. The arrogant challenge was gone, replaced by something else, a quiet, focused humility. He walked towards her, and for a moment she wasn't sure what he was going to do. He stopped a few feet away, and then, to the shock of Kowalski, who watched from the side, Evans bowed his head slightly. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its former bravado. "I asked Master Chief to call you here. I wanted to apologize. Not for challenging you, that was my job, to test what I was being taught. I apologize for how I did it. I was disrespectful. I was arrogant. And you taught me a lesson I should have learned a long time ago." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I've been thinking about that day, every day since it happened. Not about the pain, about the technique, about what you said, about using an opponent's momentum, about being smarter." He took a breath. "I don't just want to be strong anymore. I want to be effective. I was wondering if you'd consider teaching me, privately, not the whole team, just me. I need to start from the beginning." Maya looked at him for a long, silent moment. She saw the genuine change in his posture, in his eyes. This was not the same man who had challenged her 2 weeks ago. This was a man who had been broken down and was now trying to rebuild himself correctly this time. Kowalski watched, holding his breath. This was unprecedented. Maya Chen had no obligation to help the man who had tried to publicly humiliate her. Finally, she spoke. "Why?" Evans didn't hesitate. "Because I was wrong. And because I want to be the best, not the toughest, the best. And I think you're the only one who can show me the difference." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of Maya's mouth. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was the smile of a teacher who has just seen a difficult student finally have a breakthrough. She nodded once. "Okay, we start tomorrow. 5 a.m. Don't be late." Evans's face broke into a relieved, grateful expression. "I won't be. Thank you, Ms. Chen." As Maya turned to leave, she passed Kowalski. He gave her a look of profound respect. "You just made a convert," he murmured. Maya glanced back at Evans, who was already walking to the heavy bag, and a new, thoughtful look on his face. "No," she corrected gently. "He just decided to start listening. The conversion was his own." The training sessions with Evans were unlike anything Maya had done before. It was a complete deconstruction and rebuilding of a fighter. The first week, they didn't throw a single strike or attempt a single takedown. They worked on stance, on breathing, on feeling the ground beneath their feet. Maya had him stand with his eyes closed while she pushed him gently from different angles, teaching him to sense the direction of force and to subtly shift his weight to maintain his center. For a man used to explosive power, it was maddeningly slow. But Evans, his ego now firmly in check, obeyed every instruction without question. They moved on to footwork, hours of drilling the simple, the diagonal steps she had used to evade his shot. He would practice moving around cones, then around her as she walked towards him, learning to create angles, to never be directly in front of his opponent. She taught him about structure, about keeping his spine aligned and his joints stacked so that he could absorb force without collapsing, and conversely, so he could transfer his own power into the ground more efficiently. The other operators watched this transformation with a mixture of curiosity and respect. The jokes about dancing stopped. They saw Evans, one of the most aggressive men in the platoon, spending hours doing what looked like slow, meditative exercises. But they also saw the results. After a month, during a live sparring session, Evans faced off against a teammate who was known for his powerful, relentless takedowns. But the teammate shot in for a double leg, the exact same move Evans had used on Maya. Without thinking, Evans moved. He didn't sprawl and fight for position. He performed the same subtle step and hip movement he had drilled 1,000 times. His teammate's shoulder hit nothing but air, and he stumbled past, off balance. In that instant of vulnerability, Evans didn't try to power him to the ground. He simply hooked a foot, gave a gentle pull on the back of his teammate's collar, and guided him effortlessly to the mat. The room erupted. They had just seen Evans, the human battering ram, use pure technique to take down a man his own size with almost no effort. Evans looked over at Maya, who was watching from the side. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. It was the best praise he had ever received. And the relationship between Maya and the SEAL teams didn't end with Evans. Her 2-week contract was extended indefinitely. She became a regular, if still slightly unusual, presence on the base. Her methods were integrated into the regular training pipeline. She taught classes on joint locks, on escapes from dominant positions, on using an opponent's clothing and equipment against them. She taught them that the most dangerous weapon they had wasn't their fists, but their mind. The men who had once laughed at her now listened to her every word, with an intensity usually reserved for mission briefings. She had earned their respect in the most fundamental way possible, by proving, without a shadow of a doubt, that she could defeat them, and then by showing them how to defeat others the same way. Evans became one of her best students, and he never missed a session, always arriving early, always asking questions. The chip on his shoulder was gone, replaced by a quiet, confident competence. He still had his explosive power, but now it was a tool he used with precision, not a sledgehammer he swung blindly. He learned to flow, to adapt, to wait for the right moment instead of forcing the issue. He learned that true strength was the ability to control oneself, and through that, to control the opponent. The story of the instructor who broke the SEAL's ribs became a foundational legend within the team, not as a story of humiliation, but as a story of growth. It was a constant reminder that in the world of special operations, the most dangerous person in the room wasn't always the biggest one. Sometimes it was the quietest, the most patient, and the one who understood that a real fight was a conversation, not a shouting match. And Maya Chen, the woman they said was no match for a SEAL, had taught them all how to listen.